For today, I'm Mark.
Because I think we have some important information that we want to share with you, and we certainly want to get some feedback from you on some of that information. But before we get into the program, I would like to just make you aware of how we plan to spend the evening together. Basically, the meeting will involve two components. The first part of the meeting will be looking at an incident, an unfortunate incident that happened in the Flathead Valley last fall, and our findings in relation to the circumstances relating to that incident, and what action the government intends to take as a result of it. And certainly we want to give an opportunity to those in the audience to ask any questions or make any comments that they might choose in relation to that incident. So I would expect that that first part of the meeting will probably run us half an hour to 45 minutes. I would suggest then that we'll take a short break. There will be coffee and donuts available at the back of the room. I'd like you to help yourself to those. And we'll get set up for the second part of the evening, which will be an update on the status of the grizzly bear research work that has been going on for the Flathead Valley for more than a decade now, and give you some insight as to how that ties in as well with some similar kinds of research that are going on in the United States. So I would like to ask a courtesy of all of you. First of all, I'd like your questions addressed to the chair, and I will then direct them to the person that I think is best qualified to give you the answer that you're seeking. I would like the questions as they relate to the first part of the meeting to focus on the incident that's under discussion, the death of the grizzly bear in the valley. If your questions are more related to the overall status of the research and what we're finding out as a result of it and those kinds of things, I'd like you to just hold those questions off until after the second part of the meeting, when there will be ample opportunity to raise those questions with the grizzly bear researcher. I'd like to introduce the gentlemen on the podium with me. Their faces, I'm sure, are familiar to some of you. In the middle, I'm sure, is known to you all. Mr. Pat Holder, the District Conservation Officer for the Fernie District. The gentleman on his right is Mr. Jim Hyland. He is the Regional Enforcement Manager for Kootenay Region with the Ministry of Environment. And I am Dennis McDonald. Last November 7th, has troubled us all, I'm sure. It's an incident that we certainly don't want to see repeated. It's an incident that conjures up the worst that anyone who is involved in carrying out a research project hopes never happens. But the fact remains that the incident did happen, and I think it's important that we understand why it happened. I think it's also important that we understand how we can avoid it happening again. And it's equally important that we understand that it is not an everyday occurrence. I think it's important to put the incident into a larger context in terms of getting a better handle on just how much bear trapping activity does go on in relation to something like a major research project, and the fact that this incident, fortunately, was a rare one. And we hope that it will remain in that rare category. We'll be taking every measure to ensure that it does. So without any further insight from me in relation to that incident, when we first became aware of that incident, we have an enforcement arm in the Ministry of Environment. They have the responsibility to carry out the investigations that relate to anything that we feel may be in contravention of the Ministry's legislation, and in fact be a violation of that legislation. So the investigation was turned over to the enforcement program in the Ministry of Environment, and I'd like to call on Jim Hyland, the Regional Manager for the enforcement program, to outline to you how that investigation was conducted and the findings of that investigation. Jim?
At the outset, I'd like to identify who our investigation revealed to be the principal players in this grizzly bear research program in the Flathead. The program started in 1978-79 under Bruce McLennan, and it continued through under Bruce project was subsequently taken over by Fred Hovey in May of 1988. And Hovey's project is a PhD on black and grizzly bears, and he's a student at the Simon Fraser University. In 1988-89, the project expanded, allowing U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to jointly conduct bear research on the Flathead. It appears that the principal individual from the United States was one Chris Servine, and working under Chris Servine and reporting directly to him was David Reiner, who started with the project in June of 1991. Dave was working on his master's project on the use of capture collars for testing habitat quality of black and grizzly bears. He's a student at the University of Montana. Both Hovey and Rayner have their own separate studies. Bruce McLennan re-entered the study again in 1991. Bruce is associated with both Hovey and Rayner, and Bruce sits on the supervisory committee of Rayner's project. One was located at the Lower McDougall Road, one at the Burnham Creek Road, and the third trap was out of service and was not in use. The traps were supplied by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Snares were also used in this program. In August and September, Rayner was using and responsible for the two operational culvert traps. No one seemed to know who was formally responsible for the traps. However, it was understood by Hovey and Rayner that whoever was running the trap line at that time was responsible for the traps. On May 31st, 91, Rayner and a helper, Don Vernon, closed the Burnham Creek culvert trap. They also pulled the snares that were being used west of the Flathead River. They padlocked this trap because they had only one padlock, and this trap was the one that was most accessible to the public. On that same day, August 31st, Rayner went into the culvert trap on McDougall Road and closed it down. He did not padlock that trap or secure it in any other way. He did not even remove the bait that was in the trap or the bait that was hanging above the trap. His reasons for not padlocking the trap was that there was no padlock that came with the trap, and he did not have one in camp. Rayner left the Flathead on September 16th. He never returned to check the McDougall Road trap after closing it on August 31st, and to his knowledge, no one else returned to check it after he closed it down. On November the 7th, a hunter, Mr. Rayner Frost, discovered the carcass of a frozen grizzly bear in the McDougall Road trap. The finding was reported to the Conservation Officer Service, who commenced their investigation on November the 8th. The trap in question was located on a seismic trail approximately 1 kilometer from the Flathead Road. A person or persons unknown apparently reset the trap, resulting in a grizzly bear being trapped. The weather turned very cold in mid-October, and it is felt that the bear was trapped prior to or at the beginning of the cold spell. The grizzly was in all likelihood in the trap in excess of 3 weeks. Investigations to date have failed to identify the person or persons responsible for resetting the trap. However, our investigation is ongoing in this regard. Now, I'd like to point out that neither Hovey nor Rayner obtained any permits to carry on their trapping activities. Rayner assumed that he was working under the authority held by Hovey and McLellan. Hovey said said he was using the permit McClellan had received to do his study. You should note, too, that the actual permit that was issued to Bruce McClellan expired on March 31st, 1989, and no subsequent permit was issued or requested by Hubby or Rayner. Conclusions to our investigation. Hubby and Rayner were trapping in the flathead without legal authority, i.e. they had no permit authorizing them to do so. Now, I've reviewed this investigation with our Crown Counsel, and it is our combined opinion that because no permit was issued, neither Hubby nor Rayner can be charged for any offense dealing with permit violation, because there was no permit in existence. Possible charges, however, are A, trapping without a permit, B, illegal possession of dead wildlife, and C, illegal possession of live wildlife. However, the problem is that any such charges would not be successful because of officially induced error. This means basically that the ministry staff, including the Conservation Officer Services, were well aware of the operation that was being carried out by Rayner and Hubby, and in allowing them to proceed, in fact, gave government approval for them to carry on their operation. And therefore, we do not feel that that there is sufficient ground to charge either one of the two of these gentlemen. And we do not, as I mentioned earlier, have any, our investigation has not revealed anyone responsible for resetting the trapping question. And that, in essence, is the nature of the investigation.
Well, because as indicated by Jim's remarks, certainly the permitting process is one means that the ministry relies on to set the ground rules under which trapping activities of this nature normally take place. And I'd like to call on Rick Morley, the Regional Fish and Wildlife Manager, to speak to the permitting process.
Okay. Under the Wildlife Act, individuals capturing wildlife, conducting research on wildlife require a permit issued by the regional manager or by someone designated by the regional manager. And we've gone back and looked at the permits that have been issued over the years. As Jim Highland indicated, this research has been going on since 1978, approximately 14 years of grizzly bear research. And I've looked up the permits. The permits were issued continually from 1978 to as far as I can tell, 1989. And they had a number of conditions with them. I'll just go over some of those conditions with you so you get a feel for what the original permits looked like. And in addition, you should bear in mind that if the individual had applied for a permit, this is the sort of conditions that would have been in the permit. And I should also tell you that if he'd applied for a permit, we would have issued him with one. We were aware of the research, we supported the research, and the fact is he didn't apply for it, we didn't remind him, and he didn't get a permit. But if he had applied, this is the sort of conditions that would have been in it. The first condition is that copies of all information obtained in relation to the grizzly bear research program would be made available to the Fish and Wildlife Branch of BC, Ministry of Environment, upon the cessation and termination of the program. In other words, we would get the benefit of the research. Secondly, a copy of all the capture activities must be submitted to the Cranbrook, BC Environment, Fish and Wildlife Office within 2 months of completion of the program, and must include statistics of species captured, sex, age, location, ear tags, collar frequencies if they're radio collared, the capture technique that was used, all those sort of details that relate to capturing the animal. Thirdly, all animals captured, accidentally killed, or dispatched for humane reasons, or during accidents, would have to be reported immediately to the program and to the province of British Columbia. The permittee would be required to submit all the biological data pertinent to that particular instance, and the animal would then become the property of the province of BC.
I'd like to present that opportunity to any of you assembled here, if you have any questions or any further clarification of any of the information that you've heard, certainly welcome. You're raising that question to our attention now so that we can address it.
Fatalities has there been in the last 14 years regarding the research with the bear?
Okay, we'll come back to that question if you like, because it will deal with the overall grizzly bear research program, which Dr. McCullen will be outlining in his remarks in the second part of this evening's program. What I would like to do now is if we could focus the question specifically on this incident and in terms of the circumstances that were involved.
Well, I think it's a relevant question.
I'm not saying it's not relevant, but I think it's better picked up when we get the information from Dr. McClellan in terms of what has gone on in the grizzly bear research program in the Flathead
All right,
its
well,
inception.
just answer the question. Has there been other fatalities?
Yes, there has.
I'll answer that. There's been 3 grizzly bears killed due to us down there in 14 years. We caught 160 grizzly bears in captures. One was killed by a person. The bear was in a trap, came up and shot it. Another was killed by another bear. And we've also handled about 500 black bears. So out of perhaps 600 bears, we've had 3 deaths. And this was the one that I feel.
McClellan talks. We'll give you the insight as to who underwrites the costs of the studies, what are the studies intended to tell us, who's involved in them, all those kind of things. But I would like right now just to use this particular first question period to deal with the information these gentlemen have given you about the incident, so it doesn't slip people's minds and you don't get the opportunity later on.
Is there a specific number of bears that can be trapped under that permit, or is it open to trap as many as you?
Wildlife, they must remove the collar. You can't find them anymore. They're rotting. People, guide outfitters, my friends have shot grizzlies with collars and they're rotten. And there's got to be some stipulation on removing the collars, even if if the battery's only good for a year or 2, they better remove it before a year is up. Simple as that.
Okay, you raised 2 questions. One, what's the penalty for
Penalty,
violating
yeah.
a permit? I'd like to call on Jim or Pat to perhaps address that.
Maximum penalty is $5,000 and 6 months or both.
$5,000 or 6 months or both is the maximum penalty.
That's if you have a permit. But these fellows did not have a permit, so there is no penalty. It shouldn't matter if the guy has a permit or not.
Ordinarily, they could have been charged for trapping bears without a permit. Had not it been known to the staff of the ministry that they were engaged in a research project that involved trapping bears in the area. The fact that the ministry had prior knowledge of what they were doing, even though we didn't specifically know they didn't have a permit, basically is what is called officially induced error in terms of giving them a defense they could use to get off the charges.
Okay, what about the second one?
We didn't know what they were doing in there.
Fault not to enforce that?
Yes, there's no question.
Okay, what about the second question? Removing collars.
Okay, maybe I could call on Bruce to speak to that one. Yeah, okay, he'll address that in his talk in terms of how the collars are designed to work and how long do they last and what happens to them after they've become non-functional.
And if you get a stake and hang it out, and once it's old, hang it up in a tree for 2 or 3 weeks in August, well, that's the shape of his bait. When the maggots get at it, they eat it, they pupate, it ends up dissolving. This is August. And as far as the trap being shut, several people saw the trap shut. It wasn't just Dave Reiner's word and the removal of the trap people, but there was other people in the area, and we got letters saying, yes, we saw the trap shut too, several people. So I think it's fairly well proven that the trap was shut.
I just want to see how much negligence is, like this, by all means, how much credibility does he have now? You know, that's what I'm getting at.
Well, since it's happened, I mean, it's been a pretty big impact on me. And I talk to bear biologists all over the world, and I've mentioned it to several people, and they're all changing. I mean, no one wants traps before. And it's kind of everyone's quite shocked by this thing. And it's not like he did anything that was really, there were some things we did that was totally different. I mean, usually we never unsent traps. Usually we trapped over those culverts right through the year, but this fall we did something different.
economy, the environment, national unity, and the international order are all in a state of flux, leaving people feeling alienated and powerless. But Bruce Alexander believes the 12-step response is taking society in the wrong direction.